What's up, y'all? Will here at Schedulefly. Today we have another member of the Big Red F team, Adam Reed. We probably should continue with a series of folks from Big Red F. I'm kind of thinking out loud, but maybe we'll just do that. In fact, we're going to do that. If they'll be kind enough to let us speak to more of their team members, because Big Red F is quite an interesting story to me. We've been fortunate at Schedulefly to serve them for probably like 14 of our 16 years. It's been a long time. And, Dave Query started Big Red F in 1994. So they're coming on 30 years here. And so for almost half that time, they've been a Schedulefly customer. And we've been able to watch Dave and Dana and the team they've assembled grow this business. And, Audrey Quistorf, the CEO, was on our podcast several months ago. We recently had Megan Godey, COO. Now we have Adam Reed here, and there's others that we should talk to, because if you want to follow a business that has figured out this alchemy of marrying growth with staying or feeling small, marrying growth with keeping a great culture, well, then Big Red F, there's no better example. There may be other examples, but there's no better one. I'm sure of that. And, they're headquartered in Boulde, Colorado. I think they've got around 800 employees now, 16 plus locations, and multiple concepts. Yet when you talk to the people at Big Red F, you don't get this corporate feeling. You get this family feeling, this feeling of how important culture is in this organization. And I mean, not just that they say it is. They take it very, very seriously. And it's the foundation of this business. It always has been. And you'll hear Adam talk here early in the episode about, the management team, the leadership team going out to all their locations. They're in the process of doing that right now. It's 16 of them, and as far as from Boulder as Kansas City. They were there recently, I know, because I heard from Audrey while they were there. And, well, anyway, what a great organization. That's all I'll say. If you're interested in that idea of how do you grow but keep things feeling small, how do you grow but keep the culture intact and strong, how do you make the culture as strong or stronger as it's ever been as you grow? Well, this is a great organization to follow. So before we follow any further, let's hear a word from our sponsor, Pop Menu. Pop Menu is a sponsor of this show. They're also a partner of Schedulefly. And Pop Menu is all about making your day easier and your sales bigger. They will simplify your marketing operations, bring in more guests, and capture customer data for personalized remarketing to keep them coming back. With one super simple to use platform that integrates with most point of sales like Toast and Square and a number of others, Pop Menu starts with a beautifully designed, easy to update interactive menu that transforms the guest experience online. It includes a brand new website that's optimized for search engines like Google for no additional cost, automated digital marketing, online ordering, and waitlisting, and you'll never miss another call with their AI answering solution that costs as little as 47 cents an hour. Plus, just so much more. So there's a link in the show notes. Check them out. I'll add my 2 cents. The mutual customers that we have that we share with Pop Menu at Schedulefly that I've spoken to collectively will agree. Great product, great company, great customer service, and great results. Check them out, and check out this awesome episode with Adam Reed, Big Red F, super dude. I've gotten to know Adam over the years. Really glad to have this chance to talk to him, and more episodes coming soon. See ya.
How about now?
We good, man.
Awesome. I don't think I've ever seen those glorious locks of yours. There's always a ball cap on top. That was a first for me.
Ball cap. There is always a ball cap. That's funny. Yeah, man. I still got a full head. It's just
that's good. You're hiding it. Unlike the rest of us, we got to flaunt those bald spots and show where we can get a little more suntan.
I love it, man. Are you're at Big Red F today? Is that right?
I am. I tilt this so I'm not quite so fluorescent. There we go.
I'm in the. There's like
This could not be a more drab background. I'm at a little room up at this entrepreneurial center at Davidson College, which is
Oh, cool.
where I went to school. It's like an
Mhm.
hour from my house now, and I'm kind of involved off and on up here with this entrepreneurial center. And so
Nice.
they got me this little room here to hang while
Cool.
I talk to you. Yeah.
Nice. Good. Got your own little cubby.
Yeah, man. How's everything going?
Good. Really good. Really good. I just actually got back. Um, was in Florida for a couple of days visiting family. And so we flew back in last night, and just getting reacclimated for the rest of the week, but feeling good, and we're rolling through a process right now we're calling road shows. So we're actually taking the admin and ownership group. So myself, Audrey, Megan, Dave, Dana, um, and then the directors of operations for each individual store. And we're rolling around each one of the individual restaurants and just talking through a lot of the initiatives that we've started or are continuing or see on the horizon. A lot of that has to do with our DEI programming that we're really formalizing, and then building boards that hourly and management members have the opportunity to serve on, as far as our diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity processes. And then, just talking about our community offerings, charitable offerings, leadership development, management development, as well as what's the other piece? And wellness. So trying to find resources for mental wellness, physical wellness, telehealth resources for hourly employees, and so really trying to double down. We've always intended to be and felt like we were a quality place to work. But trying to formalize a lot more of that. We depended upon and leaned on the goodwill and good moral fiber of our people, with, Dave being at the top of that list as far as loyalty and appreciation of all humans and all that. But now we're trying to be more, because there's aspects of many of the younger generations in our restaurants that's I can see when we start talking about diversity and inclusion, heads bobbing and smiles growing, and just there's a lot of that is formalized at a very legalese level in a lot of companies, checking a box, making sure that we're having them take the proper videos so that if they say something stupid, we can fire them and prove that we did our part, as opposed to actually creating areas to be involved, and hopefully create workplaces that everybody feels welcome and feels progressive and listening. And it's exciting because we've never done any of that kind of work before. Even though we've done a lot of that work before, we've never been so intentional about it. And so these road shows are basically going around for an hour and a half, and talking through a lot of those programs that have been formalized or are coming down the pike. And it's rare. It's never happens that all of us will be in one spot at one time. And so it's nice to give those teams in the individual restaurants hopefully a little better understanding of, like, this is the owner, this is the CEO, this is the COO, these are all the people that are working all the time for you, that in their day to day makes no difference to them, really doesn't have any impact, or they don't have an understanding of. So it's been good. So that's what we've been doing. It's at least somewhat new.
Well, I got a text from I texted Audrey the other day, and I heard back from her, and she said, hello from Kansas City. So
Yeah.
you guys were out there for that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, and how many locations do y'all have now? Is it like 16 or?
There's 16 if you include Velvet Elk and Boulder. The post Boulder is being different, because you've got 7 posts, 6 jacks. That takes us to 13, obviously. And then West End and Centro, and then Velvet Elk, which is directly next to post Boulder. If you want to include the commissary, you could potentially say 17, because the commissary has been, I headed up a catering company that we ran out of there right after we acquired it, and that was all of last summer. Is that right? Or was that summer of 20? I can't remember if that was 21 or 22. But the first summer that we had it, that's funny, I can't put those together. We ran a catering company, fledgling out of there, did the best that we could. Difficult business to grow. Plus, we've done so many charitable events through the restaurants that are really kind of a headache because you're trying to piece and part it together. Hey, Central, you're going to do the beans. Hey, Post, you're going to do the mashed potatoes, and then there's a lot of transportation and logistics. So running everything out of one commissary was easier, but we didn't have a flow of business. And so it was sort of, we would have 4 events one week, and the next week we would have 1. And then the week after that, we would have 8 events. And the week after that, we'd have none, and so it's obviously in any business, you sort of take time to ramp up. And we were trying to hit the ground running fast. Dave had a ton of connections, which led to a good number of parties. And then we did a lot of outside sales outreach, and we were able to generate a good amount. But then, that seasonal slowdown that hit right around October, we had staff that wasn't working in any of the restaurants. They were solely our catering staff. And then we didn't have the shifts to keep them alive. So we rotated several of them into the individual restaurants. And so that was the first iteration of the commissary. And then now we've started an exciting project. And I haven't been down there actually since they made a lot of these physical changes, but added on a ton of refrigeration. And now we're starting with Sheila's leadership and the departure, honestly, of our 30-year partner in Northeast Seafood. They ended up closing their doors and basically partnering with Seattle Fish, who had been the other big player. Paul Packer, who was our longtime partner at Northeast Seafood, sold his business off. So Seattle is easily the biggest seafood distributor in the state. But we started talking to Paul, and then Paul hooked us up with a lot of connections direct from the people he was working with. And so we're starting to self-distribute, and we're redistributing to all the Jaxes through that commissary kitchen. And so we're making trips to the airport, pulling product off the planes, bringing it out, portioning, butchering, and then sending a lot of that out to each of the Jax locations in Colorado, which should have a great monetary savings, but also a quality assurance because we know exactly what the product is that's hitting the restaurants. We've got people in all the restaurants that were capable of doing the butchery, but this saves a couple of steps and speeds us along, and honestly saves us on product costs and saves us on labor costs of breaking down some of these fish.
Just spoke to some guys out in Nashville, last week that have been growing their restaurant concept. They've been able to accelerate the growth through a commissary, and that they're just cutting a lot of prep labor out. And so I thought that was really interesting. So, well, Adam, I want to get into some of the current event stuff, particularly this stuff y'all are doing with wellness and mental health, physical health. But take me back to, I don't really know your story. Like, tell me how you got started in hospitality, how and why.
That's a funny question. So my parents like to tell the joke that I was a kid growing up that didn't like to go to fancy restaurants, and any place that was any fancier than sort of that at the time equivalent of Chili's. Like my favorite restaurant growing up was a restaurant called Bananas, and it was
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Boulder.
Okay.
I grew up in Boulder, so Dave and I have that in common. And it was a one-off restaurant of sort of one of the really prolific restaurateurs in Boulder at the time, which meant you had 2 or 3 restaurants, right? It's a different era. And so Bananas was the quintessential family restaurant, but it had this like goofy 70s swank to it too. Like you would walk in the door, and my favorite part, because I was kind of a fat kid growing up, was they would have basically like a hors d'oeuvre bar. And so it was these stainless steel bowls inset in a countertop. And this is, probably early 80s, 81, 82. And they would have goldfish and pretzels and little smoky wieners and barbecue sauce in a hot pot. And you could just, while you're waiting for your table, you were over there and get a small paper plate and offer yourself some of those things and snack on it. And then they had these stairs that went up around the bar that led to these, I'm sure they were total coke dens, which I had no idea at the time, but pillows and these little cubbies where you could fit 3 or 4 people off of the staircase. And so it was, total 70s shtick that I didn't, get it. I just thought it was cool. It was like, hey, cool little cubby hole like I had in preschool. And then, taco salad was my favorite menu item because my mom would always be like, don't eat that whole fried tortilla. And that would be, that was the pinnacle of cuisine for me. And I grew up making most of our own meals. My parents both grew up on farms, so we had a huge garden. So I had an appreciation for food preparation and food sourcing. Grandparents operated a wheat farm in just outside of Dodge City in Kansas until they were into their 80s. And then, so I had appreciation for all that, but no experience in restaurants and no exposure to it. Was a big kid, so I worked on loading docks and um, uh, uh, unloading trucks and things like that. In high school, never worked in a restaurant, and then in college, I played football in college, and so that was my job. So didn't really have any opportunity to dig into it. And then my course of study was biology, so I was pre-med in college, was heading towards going to med school, did cancer research for a couple of years out of college. Also worked as a medical assistant for about a year and a half as well, physically in the office, working for an MD in family practice. Applied to med school, took the MCAT, didn't get in. At the same time, started working in restaurants just on a lark from a friend who'd said, "Hey, just come in and give it a shot." So it was a tiny little steakhouse in Boulder. Probably was only open for 2.5 years. Still, I would rate one of the best prime ribs I've ever had in my life, because it was an old Italian restaurant. So they would cook the pizza, they would cook the prime rib in a pizza oven. And Ooh. So, it's 600 degrees and the outside just came out pork crackling, hot and caramelized. It was so good. But the restaurant had terrible access, interesting ownership, which I won't bore you with. They weren't winning any harassment competitions unless you're trying to, really promote it. But I went straight in. I was able to bypass all the service, training positions, because I could speak relatively well and I could learn the food relatively quickly. And so that was my first introduction to wine. That was my first introduction to service. And then I remember one of my favorite parts about it was that, the pastry chef would go home early, and usually we wouldn't be open that late. But at the time that there wasn't anybody in the kitchen, they'd already shut down, but we still had people making desserts. Then the servers would have to make the desserts. And for whatever reason, when I got to stand on the line without really, let's be honest, any appropriate training, but was making the tiramisu or was making the creme brulee, like that just got me so charged. I'd cooked a bunch as a kid. My parents had always cooked. All throughout college, I was that kid who was watching, great chefs on PBS. This was pre-Food Network. My friends were all sort of trying to figure it out. I was the one making breakfast burritos for the parties at the reservoir, and you just always had my hands in it, but no formal training. So then went to New Zealand for what was supposed to be a year, which was right before September 11th. Was there for 4 months when September 11th happened, came home. While I was there, I worked at a Hard Rock Cafe. And that was an interesting experience, because as an American in New Zealand, in what's basically an American themed restaurant, a lot of Americans shamefully would come in. Why do you want to be all the way across the world and go to a restaurant that's serving bad barbecue and burgers? Like, I don't get it, but they were great tippers. So in a culture that wasn't tipping. So that was, sort of just still messing with it and thinking maybe I'm going back to med school. When I got back and started working at a fine dining wine bar in Boulder called Trios, which has also since been redeveloped. But, we had Harlan Estate on the menu. That's when I started learning about Bordeaux and Burgundy and formalizing training. We had 5 certified somms on the staff at that time. And this was early 2000s. So this was when Quartermaster Sommeliers was kind of a different kind of cult than it became. It was very small. It was unknown. It was really appreciated in specific circles. And so getting somm certified kind of started me down that road of
the Court of Master Sommeliers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that guy Richard Betts? Didn't he?
Yeah. Yes. So he was one of the instructors in my class. Okay. And that's at the time that there was only I want to say 12 master sommeliers in the world.
Okay.
So it was Richard Betts, and that's probably right after Bobby Stuckey had gotten it. And Brett Zimmerman, who's here in Boulder also, he was heading towards it. I think maybe there was 23 and there was 6 in Colorado. And so there was a great community in Colorado that was promoting that. The classes were always in Aspen or always in Vail. And so there was one of those a year. The access was pretty good for us because you were basically Aspen, LA, San Diego, Florida, New York. Like it was the coasts and Colorado that somehow got that attention and made it available. So that's when I really got sparked and started managing restaurants and started taking wine seriously, and started seeing like, hey, I really see value in this. And where I think the flip was that I had such a charge about creating meaningful experiences for guests that couldn't teach themselves this information or didn't have access to it, or had access to it and we were able to have meaningful conversations and enrich their experience. That's where I my belief is that my bedside manner became my tableside manner, and that appreciation and that hope I'd made for incrementally improving someone else's life in the form of possibly family medicine, I was getting that same charge from teaching about foodstuffs or food techniques or preparations or pairings or specific productions of wines, and seeing more elation, more excitement, because this is something people wanted to do, as opposed to find out that, it's time for them to start having colonoscopies. Like the news that you get to give as a restaurateur is way more fun and things that people are open to. And so it was kind of a gradual change, but my success and excitement about building a team, training a team, that started out at Trios. And then we opened a restaurant for about 4 months between when Trios closed, and then a restaurant in Boulder that's still open now called The Kitchen, waiting for The Kitchen to open. I had 4 months where I went back to serving. And so I was serving at Brasserie 1010, which is here in Boulder as well, which just reopened about 6 months ago. Great, French brasserie style restaurant. And that was a humbling experience because I'd been serving in, a super high end fine dining wine bar and jazz club at Trios. And then I'd been managing for about a year. And then when I went back to serving, I thought, I'm not good at this anymore. I got good, but for the 3 or 4 weeks of not being good, it was this humbling experience of like, hey, grant yourself the opportunity to make some mistakes, grant yourself the peace and the time, be patient, and realize that every skill requires a little bit of learning. And even though you were great at this at one point, you're not great at it here now. Just 1% every day, 2% every day, get better, get better. And that's a mantra I share with my managers all the time when they roll to a new location, when they roll to a new concept. Hey, you were king or queen of the hill where you were before. Yeah. And it's not going to feel that way. And you're going to be frustrated with it. And you got to own that frustration and just be patient and keep working. Don't succumb to it. But know that feeling of frustration and that feeling of disappointment and that feeling of fish out of water is good, because you still have your eyes on excellence. If you're willing to just let it go, then we got something to worry about. This should be hard. This should be difficult. That's why change in position and change in location for a lot of our managers is so developmental. Because if you're in the same spot and I've experienced it myself, but if you're in the same spot for 6-7 years, you're on cruise control. You're probably not challenged anymore. You're probably not growing at the same rate you would be if we plugged you someplace else, or if you took a different role completely. So waited for the kitchen to open, was the opening manager at the kitchen for about its first 3 years. Again, very wine centric, very fine dining, made a big splash. We cooked at James Beard House. Kimball Musk is the owner, and that's Elon's brother. Yeah. And so we had solid financial backing. He also was very successful in the Silicon Valley business arena, not to the caliber of Elon, but he was pulling up in a Tesla Roadster when they first were coming off the assembly line back in the day. But that was a great learning curve for me too, because we opened with the intention of having a service style that was passive but punctual, right? So you're only at the table when you need to be, but you're not engaging otherwise. And the label that we got when we first opened was that we were egotistical. We weren't invested in the guest. We weren't having conversations that were meaningful to them. We were standing off to the side, and it felt to many of our guests like, hey, those guys are arrogant. They're not even spending time with us. They're just thumbing their noses in which was not the intent, but it was this great learning curve of people come out to eat, yes, because they want great food, and yes, because they want great service, but they also want to connect. Mm-hmm. And so we changed that up a little bit. It was the intent to not inject ourselves into the experience, to be a facilitator, but not a ringleader. And we had to change that. And then I learned that further when I left the kitchen, because I wanted to try to get to multi-unit. And Dave and I had talked about Jack's having 2 locations and how we would take it to 3 and 4. And he'd already had vision on that. And so I took a GM gig at Jack's. And when I came into Jack's Fish House, it was a rude awakening for me because I'd come from very structured, very fine dining run, very regimented service styles. And I took the gig after I'd done, sort of a massage, if you will, around the floor, but really felt the fun of it. And I, on that first night, the service style was so different than anything I was used to. I kind of had to take a step back and question, like, whoa, am I in the right place? Like, this feels sloppy to me versus what I'm used to. No reasoned process for how tables are going to be cleared, no team drops as far as how food was going to be delivered. Where was the wine knowledge at? We were selling 160, and this was back in 2007, 160, $210 platters of, seafood towers. We were selling $40 entrees without batting an eye. But where's the food knowledge? And what I came to appreciate quickly was look around the room and see what the experience is. Everybody in here is having the time of their life. And it taught me that there's a multitude of ways to create great experience for the guest. And it doesn't have to be the pinnacle of all things 4-star or 3-star Michelin, or, because that's mostly what I was concentrated on. What are the best restaurants in the world doing and how can we keep up with that? And the further and further you go down that road, then the smaller and smaller your clientele is, as far as the percentages of people that are looking for that.
Yeah.
At a pace that's going to keep you open, right? That was the issue we had with Trios when we closed that fine dining wine bar. That was, quintessential mid-90s restaurant, right? It was lamb chops with veal demi-glace, and it was horseradish with potatoes, and it kind of antiquated menus now. It feels very country clubby as I talk about it, but at the time it was the pinnacle of cuisine. And people, when they came in when we were closing, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you're our favorite restaurant. We can't believe you guys are closing. We come here every birthday." Like, is that it? Yeah, we're here for. Okay, that doesn't work. Like, if every person comes once a year, that's not going to keep us open. So Jax quickly taught me that the joy of the game, the excitement, the smiles that were coming on our guest faces, and especially in the Lodo location where I was working, we're 3 blocks from the baseball stadium. We're 2 blocks from 16th Street. We'd see a ton of hockey traffic. That restaurant could be, on one night, a full blast fine dining endeavor where you would see people in tuxedos and they were coming out for amazing fine dining experiences, buying $250 bottles of wine and fat bottles of champagne and $300 towers of seafood. And then on another night, when the Rockies are playing or the Avs are playing, it's a sports bar. And we got a happy hour that goes from 4 to 6, and people are coming in and they're just hammering us on happy hours we want them to. And we got a person in flip-flops and a tank top sitting next to somebody in a 3-piece suit, and they're having a work conversation, and the 3-piece suit is probably the intern, and the CEO's in the flip-flops and tank top. And there's just so many different ways that people used that restaurant, and they came all the time. We had one guy that would only come for the burger at a seafood restaurant, only come for the burger. And he would bring 2, 3, 4, 6. If he had people in from town and from out of town for work, he'd bring 6 people in and be like, "You know what we're going to do?" I was like, "All right, John, I do know what you're going to do. I know what yours is. What's everybody else want?" And so just so many different ways for people to utilize us. And that concept, as unlikely as it seems, as being a relatively medium to high end seafood raw bar, tons of oysters. I mean, you've been there. Yeah. It really, as a lot of restaurants claim to try to be all things to all people, it really strangely had the capacity to do that. And so that helped open my eyes to the joy and the happiness that you create in the hospitality scenario has less to do with what I think is right and more to do with how you want to use me and how I can satisfy you. And that's what hospitality is all about, to be able to do it in our highest end concept, then trickle down well to our Post brand, our West End Tavern brand, and Centro, which is Mexican but sort of upscale. Because then from Jack's, we opened up 4 more Jack's over the course of the next 5 years. So from 2011, 12, 13, 14, we opened in Fort Collins, Glendale, which is Denver, and then Kansas City. So we had 5, and then we opened the 6th in early 2020, right before COVID, in Colorado Springs. And so that was kind of my tenure as the director of operations for the Jax Group, overseeing all of the GMs and chefs for that group, along with Sheila Lucero, who today celebrates her 25th anniversary with the company, which is amazing. It's like Sheila Lucero, the culinary director for Jackson, for many of the concepts she started today, 25 years ago, which is just amazing. We're declaring it National Sheila Lucero Day. But she and I worked closely together. She was the chef at Jack's Lodo when I started as the GM, and then she and I basically were side by side for all the openings of those Jack's locations through that Colorado Springs opening in 2020. Then I shifted roles, and this is one of the situations where I learned, I was on cruise control as the director of operations for Jack's for 12 years. I moved over to what we call Food Group, which at the time was Zolo and Lola and Centro and West End. COVID caused us to change Lola, which was a Pacific Mexican style restaurant, change that into a Post, which it is now. And then Zolo, which we closed because it was the first restaurant in the group that had opened in 94. It had sort of run its course. And so Food Group had 2 restaurants. And then we also added the catering division, and then I was in charge of beverage for the whole company. And so that was a big job that had a lot of moving parts. It morphed a year or so later into where I'm at now, which is more overseeing in the whole restaurant group of our HR operations, but more focused on leadership development, management training, really whole person development for our teams, which is something we haven't had the position for before. And we also haven't had the either financial dedication or just time or personnel to create. So the directors have always had 100% of that on their plate. So I'm able to take some of that off of their plates and lighten some of their load and do a lot of the same kind of training that I've always loved, helping our managers see things in a new way, helping our managers motivate their people in a different way, help them be aware of new stressors or opportunities in the workplace, in charge of the brick and mortar part of HR, which isn't very glamorous, between certifications and harassment videos and making sure people are onboarding correctly and just all of that nuts and bolts. That's like, I'd like that to be about 2.5% of the job. It's probably about 12.5% of the job. But most of what we're looking forward to doing is enriching and developing our teams in ways that they haven't either had time for, we haven't made time for them for, or ways that they weren't aware of. Because it really, investing in our people is our prime concern. That's the major mode of my job, which is super exciting because we've never had it before. And our teams need it. It helps us with longevity. It helps us with morale and culture. And those really, as far as hospitality is concerned, are some of the most important things you can focus on. If you've got a group that's just mailing it in because they want a paycheck, that's reflected to the guest. Versus if you've got a crew that's working for each other and excited about creating a hospitality experience. And we talk a lot about basically creating memories. At every orientation, I have a little piece about, what it is to create a memory, and why does your brain start recalling something. There's a great book that I'm sure you've read, if not, I highly suggest it, called The Power of Moments. And it talks about peaks and valleys in an experience, and that you remember the peaks and you remember the valleys. We talk similarly about that, if you're, I'll joke in that orientation, what did you have for lunch a week ago Thursday? Might be able to come up with it, but probably not. How many times did you start your car yesterday? Or how many times did you sneeze 2 days ago? Like, there's so much of life that you don't remember. Right. And so what is it that we create a memory with? Is it something extraordinary? Is it a gift of emotion? Is it an emotional attachment? Is it a engagement, a wedding, a memorial? All those things. There's all kinds of ways that those get thrust upon us, but then there's other ways that we create them for people. And that is when we're in that mode from a hospitality standpoint, because the team feels totally directed and in charge of helping positively change the person that's sitting at the table ahead of them. Or similarly, in the heart of the house, I get a ticket that comes in and it's got all kinds of red ink on it. And I know there's all kinds of modifications there. Do I approach it with these people again? Or do I approach it with here's our challenge. Let's get this exactly right because these modifications are important to this guest. That cultural piece, how are they dedicated to it? How much can we get them, thinking that way and understand the why? Not just do it because I say so, but here's the why. And do you value that? And that's what we're hoping to continue to grow.
How much of that is that's such an important mindset. I mean, it's an important mindset in any business, but in hospitality, sure. It's the what you're talking about. I'm curious, do you hire people that think that way naturally and help foster that, or do you also find that you hire people that there's a gap between that way of thinking and the way they think now, but you can train them to understand the why so that they grow? Because you're talking about, people growing 1% a day. If you've got a growth mindset, there's a growth mindset and there's a fixed mindset. And if you have a growth mindset, then you do want to grow and learn and get better. And maybe you don't fully understand that when you first start in hospitality, but you grow into learning that. Or are y'all very focused on hiring people that are already thinking that way and then teaching them how to serve or how to bartend or whatever? And I ask that because I feel like that is it. Like that is what hospitality truly is at its core. And I'm so fascinated with, through COVID and on the other side of COVID and this next generation that's coming in, and even through talking to my own kids, like grasping that, like I get it now and you get it, but we've been around the block. Mm-hmm. I'm just so curious about a generation of young people coming into hospitality. Is that mindset ubiquitous enough that you find people that already think that way and you train them how to serve, or do you have to train them to think that way, or both?
I think that is, to your statement, it is the quintessential question. I think it is much harder to train that mindset than it is to train the structure of service.
Yeah.
This is when the spoon goes down. This is when the fork comes up. This is when the dirty silverware should leave the table. This is, how you should hold a glass. This is how you should present this wine. Those are black and white standards that take time and frankly are things that I worry about maybe less than I used to. When I was in my fine dining rigor, all that stuff was paramount. There was only one way to serve this table. And if we didn't have a perfect military drop at the moment that everybody was at the table at the same time and the right number of hands to serve the right number of guests, and did we serve the ladies first, blah, 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 all that stuff, that was focus. Very rare, certainly in the concepts that we're running, that any of our guests actually give a hoot about that.
Right.
They're not going to sweat it. And we've changed our mode too. Like ladies first, not really anymore. It's kind of an antiquated notion. Let's just get the food out as a group and make sure that things are arriving in a timely manner. If we're dragging a plate, then let's not, put the whole table out until that last plate is ready. And hey, why are we dragging a plate? Right? Like that's the mentality. But the connectedness, the ethos of hospitality, it's either going to be learned really quickly because you've never heard it before and you are predisposed to that kind of idea, or it's probably not your game. And that's not discounting anybody else, but we have just implemented as part of this program, a new hiring process, which we had derivative of back in the day prior to COVID, long before COVID. And the first question on most of our interview guides, and we try to have everybody using the same interview guide, because if you have consistent interview questions, then you start to learn better what a good answer looks like, right? If I'm asking this candidate for two reasons, I'm asking candidate A this set of questions and candidate B that set of questions, then I don't have any way to compare candidate A and candidate B. And we found so often in our hiring for our inexperienced managers, if I'm talking with you for 40 minutes and I'm talking with you for 40 minutes, this 40 minutes might be active and exciting and fantastic. That 40 minutes might be, I'm still digging for you to say something that makes me excited. And then I get excited because I finally found that thing. I hire both of you. This is an A. This is a D. We shouldn't be digging. We should be blown away at the start. If you're not impressive to me in the first 5 minutes, how are you going to feel to a table?
Yeah, right.
That's the amount of time we have to make that first impression. So the first question on a lot of our interview guides is, why are you in hospitality? And this is exactly what I coach our teams. Why are you in hospitality? And the three answers that we get that we will not accept, which are typically the most common answers: the money's really good. I really like the money for the time that I work. And I'm talking almost specifically front of house, but with our tip share program, our heart of house makes great cash too, but the money's good. I like the hours because they're flexible and it meets my schedule outside of the restaurant. And it's what I've always done. So what we train and hope that our retort would be is, okay, I appreciate that. Those are all good reasons. But my expectation would be that you're paid well for your work no matter what you do, if you're valued by your employer, that your schedule would fit your needs as an employee, regardless of where you're working. And just because you've done something for 15 years doesn't mean you're good at it. So tell me, why do you love hospitality? Why do you choose this? You can work in any other arena. Why do you choose this? And it's funny to tie this in. It goes back to one of my experiences when I was applying to med schools. My answer when somebody said, why do you want to be a doctor, was, I want to help people. And I could see the interviewer get agitated. Like, that answer pissed them off so bad. They were, because they've had probably 17 of these interviews already today, and they've talked to a bunch of snotty faced kids, about, I want to help people. And they're like, you can help people in any arena. You can pump gas. You can be a librarian. You can work at a video store, because it was that long ago. You can work at the grocery store. You can be a plumber. You can, all these things help people. There's a million ways to help people. Why do you want to be a doctor? Well, why do you want to be in hospitality? I love talking about food with guests. I love incrementally improving somebody's day. I love making smiles, and this is my way to I choose to do it. There's a billion answers that have spirited excitement about the construct of, I'm feeding you. And if they don't have that, we should end the interview, say, thank you so much. Your skill set and our needs don't match at this time. We wish the best of luck. We've been in that interview for 4.5 minutes. We've learned all we need to know about them, because if they don't understand what hospitality is or could be, or we don't have some spark that challenges us to say, hey, I would be doing a disservice to our guests by not getting this person in front of them, or I would be doing a disservice to our kitchen by not getting this inspired person. It could be somebody who's brand new, straight out of culinary school, or maybe not even culinary school, but they tell you a fantastic story about how they used to make chili with their grandma. I want to work on the line because I remember my favorite memories growing up were cooking with my grandparents. Like, you tell me that kind of story, I can feel where your heart's coming from. And that's something we can work with. So I guess, as I'm answering your question long-windedly, it really is the intangibles that are harder to teach, and the inspiration about what hospitality and the restorative nature of restaurants, because that's who we're supposed to be, restaurateurs, restorers. That piece is more exciting to me than somebody who's got 7 years of line cook experience, or they've been a server at a fine dining restaurant in a beach town. They're in San Diego or whatever, and come in here, if they don't have the other. We've had people, especially with the mountain towns around here, you see a lot of people that have just been mailing it in mountain towns for 5 years. They've worked at some of the best restaurants up there, but they were never hospitality committed. They were getting a ski pass and working it out. God bless them. I wish I'd done that at some point. I never did.
Me too.
But yeah, right. But they would interview just like it's another gig. I'm just here to facilitate everything else I'm doing outside. And work-life balance, that should absolutely be true. But if you're fully committed to your out of work experience and you're not fully committed to your in of work experience, that's not balance. So we want to see that same level of excitement and investment and wholehearted commitment. Who you are matching with hospitality is important.
Is it harder to find those folks these days? I mean,
it steamrolls, it's hard to find. Yes. I mean, the talent pool has shrunk. But I think that sometimes just by asking those questions, you can discover, it might not have been their first answer. My favorite is when they give those three answers. Well, the schedule's good, the money's good, and I've done it for the last 6 years. So, it seemed like a logical fit. Like, okay, well, tell me why you did it in the first place. Tell me why you're passionate about it. Why do you love working in hospitality? Oh, well, I mean, I I love the smile on somebody's face when I introduce them to a new kind of wine, or I just love it when I'm able to talk a guest into a dessert because they you know that they want it and they're not going to take that leap unless you suggest it. And I love when I describe something and I see their eyes light up, because it's the same thing. Honestly, I love as a guest. If I have I think most people in a restaurant environment like being sold because the no is so easy, right?
Mm.
It's the only sales environment where you're guaranteed to buy. You can go to a car dealer. Anytime I'm buying a car, which is not that often, I'm going to the dealership and I know I'm not buying anything. It doesn't matter what deal they throw at me. I'm not buying anything. Or hopefully, if I'm going into a souvenir shop at the end of a museum with my daughters, we're not buying anything. I don't always win that one.
Yeah.
But
I got
if
you.
I'm at a restaurant, I know I'm buying.
Yep.
So the sale is easy. It's zero pressure from the salesperson standpoint. What am I asking you to spend another $7? But if I'm sitting down and you're going to tell me, hey, this is not to be missed, and you should give this a shot. I had the exact experience. We were traveling last week, and I was really at a pass. So we were at a restaurant in Florida, and I really wanted to get peel and eat shrimp, and I really wanted to get stone crab claws because got to, right? And peel and eat shrimp had been on the menu at Jack's forever, and so I wanted it. And the mustard sauce that's at Joe Stone Crab in Miami was sort of the inspiration for that dish, and it's all over Florida. So I was like, I'm in Florida, I got to get peel and eat shrimp, and stone crabs are available, so I got to get stone crab claws. And then I asked the server, I was like, I don't really know where to go from here. This menu's so big. Like, tell me something else, but I'm feeling seafood. And he gave this description of this seafood stew that was like $15 and it was loaded with all of the seafood. And it got me charged. He could have sold me on anything else on that menu. There was $36, $42 entrees, $58 steak. He didn't go there. He said, if you want seafood, this is exactly where you should go. I eat that 3 nights a week. It never gets old. It's kind of like if Florida had its version of bouillabaisse, and it was awesome. But he made it so easy, and so that kind of experience is what brings people back. We would go back to that restaurant if we were back in Florida in a heartbeat, and that's exactly what the game's about. Did I sell myself in this experience, make you feel welcome enough that this is something you can't live without? The greatest product successes build raving fans. You've got to have people that are on your team. If you compare it to like a sports franchise, people are buying jerseys. They're wearing your logo all over town. There's a fandom to sports franchises that's different than restaurants, but maybe not. Just see Cracker Barrel t-shirts. Maybe that's more nostalgia than it is like somebody who goes to Cracker Barrel all the time. But you wear schedule fly hats all over this town. So if you become a fan, you want to associate yourself with that, whether you're a promoter by just saying, hey, if you've got a restaurant, where should I go if I'm in Denver? Well, you should go to these 3 places. And maybe they get a t-shirt.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, it's interesting because I'm curious what happens over the next few years. You all have earned the right through decades of success to be selective with who you hire. Some restaurants will hire anybody that just has a pulse just about.
Well, and I would be lying if I said we didn't fall victim to that too. I mean, this is honestly a new program that we're rolling out, something we've had aspects of before. We revisited it because we're now at a time where we can be more selective. The labor pool has come back to a certain extent. And frankly, in the interview, that is the first day of training for somebody that you hire. And so if you're setting that expectation from the jump, they start to understand the why before they've even filled out any paperwork. So that really sets us ahead with them. And then it leaves someone leaving that didn't get the gig. They understand a little bit more about who we are. But we have to be, we try to coach our teams. We should be interviewing 10 times as many people as we are, because we might be missing some diamonds in the rough. We should be interviewing more, and we should be hiring a smaller percentage thereby of the people that we interview. We should be turning down a lot more people. And I think that's a challenging skill for a lot of young managers because they hate to say no. And that's
Right.
where we usually would have them sitting with somebody for 45 minutes because they'd set that time aside to do an interview. with somebody that they have no business wasting both of our time with. I
Right.
know I'm not going to hire you, but I'm going to keep digging to try to find something that's going to be satisfactory enough so I can say yes, so I don't have to interview the next 12 people.
Right.
Whereas we should be interviewing 15 people, hiring 2, as opposed to interviewing 3 and hiring 3 because we think one of them is going to flame out. We've certainly been guilty of that, no doubt.
I remember the first book we did that Dave was in, the Restaurant Owners on Court book, like 12 years ago. There's a guy that was in that, and he said, I'll never forget this. He said, focus on hiring the top talent and the customers will follow. And he talked about how hard it was to get a job at his restaurant, but he was so selective because, it was an investment, like the investment up front of doing more interviews and getting the right people just meant that the team was going to, the customers will follow. Like they're going to, they're going to have the great experience with the best people, and they're going to keep coming back because the experience is differentiated. Food's got to be great, but that experience and that connection that you're making with your team member is what really is, to your point, is memorable. I mean, I remember when I go to a restaurant and have really good service because it's not that common, right? I mean, you remember that now, and you go, that was really cool.
Yeah,
I'm going to talk to that place because I don't get that. The bar for service is super low now. I mean, not just restaurants, like just everywhere and even in my end. I mean, like in any industry, if you're just providing really great service with people now and being intentional and present in the moment, they're like, holy cow, that's something different. I like that.
They don't expect it. And honestly, what we try to teach our teams is the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more fun you have.
Yeah.
Because we show a lot of our teams an old video it's an old chart house training video called the fish video. And it's been around probably since the mid 90s. And it's, who knows if any of these guys, maybe they do still work there, but at the Pike Market, fish market in Seattle, where they're throwing the fish, and they have these tenets of, be present, or be there is what they call it. And another one is play, have fun with your guests, engage them, be a part of their great experience, do something that is going to embellish on it, and let them know it's okay to have fun, not taking yourself too seriously. And that obviously happens with all of the joking around and the throwing of fish and all that. And so, we don't have that exact scenario and opportunity. But you can play with your guests, and just be involved. And the more you do that, the more fun it is for you. I can think of a training seminar we did years ago where we actually had a recording of a customer service call with, I can't remember if it was Comcast or I think it was Excel Energy, which is like it was DirecTV. It was DirecTV. And that customer service rep could not have cared less. Like, reading from the manual, obviously, at one point, if I remember correctly, I think he said, okay, I'm going to read this because it says I have to, like, prefaced it with that. And then it was something about, customer service satisfaction. And do we want to take a survey or something like this? Hopefully this person was either had quit and it was their last day, or was literally their first day, because they were awful at a level that was incredible. And then on the contrary, there was a recording of a customer service experience we had for somebody at Zappos, which is world renowned for their customer service, and was looking for a rare sneaker. And just weird to place a phone call to Zappos to ask about buying a shoe, right? I mean, it's online. That's the whole conduit they have for purchasing anything. But this customer service rep was extraordinary because it was just a conversation. Hey, I'm looking for this shoe. No, I don't see that shoe, but I got one that's similar to it. Hey, I got a zany question about these. I was asking if they had a set of basically like tire chains for your shoes, which you see in the mountains here a lot. It's basically sort of stretchy rubber that you can put on over your shoes. And she had no idea what I was talking about, but she kept researching it. And she was looking for leather booties and other things that would fit the bill. And then by the end of the conversation, we're talking about each other's families. She's asking about my grandma. I can't even remember how we got there, but it was probably on the phone for 17 minutes. and we were chuckling and laughing with each other. And all she was doing was listening and being involved. That was it. It was strictly humanity on the phone, where we get so transactional and taking a reservation. How many in your party? What time? I don't have it at that time. Does this time work? Just it's totally transactional, not what brings you in this evening? What can we do special for you? Any dietary restriction? Is there anything we should know about the part? And when you get that question asked of you, it instantly changes the temperature of the conversation. And so I'm the same way. If I'm making a reservation and somebody says, are you celebrating anything? Is there any special access needs that we should know about? Is there any special foodstuffs that you absolutely love? Maybe I can give you some tips about the menu on your way in. Like, the dining experience has begun at that point.
Yes.
My experience is longer and more enriched because I've already made a great interaction with a member of the service team that may or may not be there that night. They might be at a call center in Omaha. I don't know, but they already started my excitement towards my night out. So it happens at every step along the way.
I love that y'all, I mean, as big as Big Red F has gotten, you still have that intentional, small, local feel. And it's got to be a constant balancing act and challenge to figure out how to continue to do that at scale. I mean, you take Zappos. I remember those days. Zappos was amazing. Zappos, you would order shoes and they'd show up like no shipping cost the next morning. Like, you'd order them at 8:00 at night. They would pay to have them show up on your doorstep at like 10 a.m. the next day. And then of course, over time, and then Amazon bought them. And now, like, I don't even know if they're still, but that piece is what, that amidst all this, that's a technology company. Like, that's, they were
right.
Amidst the technology and amidst all that's around us now, we're still people, and we want to connect with people. When we can connect with people in a real way, it resonates and it makes a difference, and it's memorable and it's differentiated. And I thought that y'all are still, I've been to your restaurants when Dave knew I was going in, and I've been to your restaurants. Nobody knew I was going in, and always, the same. And I've done that on purpose, right? Like,
right.
I was there. I went into West. I didn't tell anybody. I was like, I'm just going to go West End Tavern. It was great. The food was great. The service was great. Everything was great. It was, very welcoming. Because I feel like sometimes I'm like, oh, they know I'm with schedule. Like, they're like going out of the way. But nah, when I go in your places and nobody knows, and I don't have a schedule fly hat on, and they have no client.
That's the greatest validation too, is just a human, right? In feeling that love from a complete and total stranger. That is the greatest. It isn't like, it's nice to feel like a made guy, right? You roll in and somebody knows who you are. Somebody told them who you are. And regardless of, globally how special you are, you're special to this person that has ties to the operation. Great. Like, that's awesome. It feels good. But it feels better when you're able to create that experience for somebody and they're a total stranger. So, you got time for a story on that? This is like one of my favorite hospitality stories of all time. So my wife and I were on our honeymoon, we spent a couple of nights in Anguilla, and then we went over to the French side of St. Martin. But when we stayed in Anguilla, we were a resort called the Cuisinart, which is literally owned by the same company that makes the kitchen, like Robocoups, right? So they had a huge culinary program, huge hydroponic farm, like all these things we're really excited about. But the greeting as we got there, we pull up in a cab from the boat that came over to the island, pull up in the cab or the shuttle, I can't remember which it was. We got out, we're loading our laundry, and the gentleman at the front door comes over and asks, like, hey, can I get your name? What's the name of the party? And I gave him my name. And he looks down the list and he looks up again. He said, what was that name again? And I looks down the list and he's like, I don't see it here. And we're like, what? We know we're in the right place. We know we booked this. We are a long way from home. We are in a place that doesn't have a ton of other bookings available. And about the time he sees us start to get a little bit distraught, he's like, I'm just messing with you. Follow me this way. Like, what a chance he took, right? I wonder how many times that's blown up in his face. I don't, but that set it off. And then from that moment on, he walks us through the lobby. He introduces us, as we're walking through and they're getting all of our bags, walks us through, introduces us to the events manager, introduces us to the concierge, introduces us to the beverage manager, introduces us to the food and beverage manager. shows us where the little wine cellar is. And tonight, if you're interested, there's a Chardonnay and cheese tasting if you want to get into that, to which my wife scoffs at because she thinks she doesn't like Chardonnay. And then we went to that tasting and she loved it. And so he's showing us all these things, lets us know, hey, and then Drew introduces us to the housekeeping desk. And at the housekeeping desk, they tell us, we're so sorry, room's not quite ready yet. You're a little bit earlier than we were expecting, but we'll just have a seat right over here as our guide walked us up at one of these tables, and we'll just bring you a cocktail and you can sip on that until your room's ready. So we're sitting down at the high top with a couple of glasses of sort of a Bellini type cocktail, feeling like, we have been treated like royalty. At that time, the general manager of the hotel stops by and says hello and says, thanks so much for joining us. We're sorry about the delay on your room. It'll be ready shortly. 4 minutes later, we're probably halfway through with our drinks. Attendant comes by and says, hey, your room is now ready. If you'd like to join us, you can follow me to your room. Greatest greeting ever. Misstep at the housekeeping desk, right? They're a little bit behind. They totally make up for it by giving us the cocktails, walk us to our room. So we feel like this place is amazing. And it was. But come to find out, or at least my perception, I don't have this verified, every time we walked back through the lobby, there was always a couple at that table having a welcome beverage. Our room was ready. They manufacture that whole thing for every guest, every time they're through the door. You will not go to your room, I don't think, without having a welcome cocktail. So whether they invite you and say, hey, would you like to sit here? We've got a couple of cocktails for you before you go to a room, or they lay some fib about the room not being ready, whatever it would be. This is what we talk about a lot with one of our values as a company, is that we hustle, right? There's a hustle. Speed of movement, rapidity, how much can you done, how much can you get done in a short amount of time, how efficient can you be, how much can you physically hustle. But there also is a hustle to hospitality, and that greeting in that resort was an absolute hustle, and it was for our benefit. It was awesome. And so that made me love it more. Some of my friends were like, well, don't you feel like that was disingenuous? And they're, no, this is Disneyland, man. I don't need to know what's behind the curtain. I want you to make me feel special. And that's exactly what that was all about. And if every player on that team wasn't involved in it, it doesn't work. They've all got to play their part. It was awesome.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah.
That's
super cool.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. I mean, that's making a memory. That's creating that reality that maybe they didn't know they were going to have. And it takes effort. But if you're involved in it and you see how it impacts people, and I've told that story 100 times, and it never gets old for me because it was so good.
Yeah, it makes me want to check that place out.
yeah, it was great.
Well, look, man, Adam, I respect your time, man. I'll let you roll. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, man. This is fun.
Yeah.
We need to do this again. This is a great conversation, and I love your passion and enthusiasm and care about what you do and how you do it and why you do it and how you're leading that team there is awesome, man. So thank you for sharing all that.
Well, Will, I appreciate the time, and it's been great. Obviously I was always angry at one of our other GMs because he signed on for Schedule Fly before I did in probably 2008. And, I always wanted to be the first, but it's been a pleasure working with you, and then this continued podcast that you continue to do and give us the opportunity to share our stories and hear the stories of others. It's special. So appreciate you sharing your network with us and letting us learn from each other. So certainly happy to do it anytime.
All right, my friend.
All right.
I'll hopefully be out there sometime this summer.
We'll look forward to it. Counting on it.
See you.
I will. Cheers.
Bye.